Hey everybody, welcome to another video review. So I just reviewed my thoughts on the Aladdin live action motion picture. Amazing movie, definitely see it. But since I'm here and I have all of this set up, I feel like I should also just spend a little bit of time talking about the ending of HBO's Game of Thrones. There's I think without exaggeration, there must be 1,000 YouTube videos talking about why this last season of the series finale was just horrible. And I certainly don't have anything much to add to that, except maybe a little bit of perspective. I think maybe a little unique take. This is mainly just for myself and my family, maybe 5-6 years down the road, we can take a look back and see how I felt about all of this. This is my first reaction video to Game of Thrones, even though I've been a pretty big fan for quite a long time. So before going into the series finale and season 8 in general, I think what I have to add, or the perspective I have to add, is more valuable by just going back to the beginning, which is the books. So George Martin, I believe, started writing Game of Thrones back in '97, give or take, and that was 23 years ago, right? 2019, so over 20 years ago. I didn't start reading A Game of Thrones, even though it was out, until probably 2001, 2002. I heard about it earlier, didn't really get into it. I started reading it because there was a little, I don't know what you call this. I guess it was a little advertisement or a little statement of support from Robert Jordan, kind of supporting George Martin. And I'm a big Robert Jordan fan, and so I was like, well, if Robert Jordan really likes this guy, and I love Robert Jordan, maybe I'll give it a try. So I tried reading A Game of Thrones. It was really hard to get into because he wrote it in a very odd way, which we'll get into. But I finished it, and I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. And I got really into it, became a really, really big fan, and the rest is history. So to give you my background, I've been reading his books for 20 years. I know his books, A Song of Ice and Fire, very, very well. Went on message boards, theorized, discussed, went on a songofIceandfire.net or whatever from the old days. Know his books really well, talk to a lot of people who love his books. On top of that, I also know George Martin, the writer, in terms of his other work very well. I read Fever Dream, I've read pretty much all of his anthologies, all of his short stories, read all of that before he was famous. Read his science fiction stuff, okay? And so with that background, you may also not know, by the way, that he was a writer and a producer of the Beauty and the Beast TV series, starring Linda Hamilton. I think it was back in the 80s or so. So all of this is important because when you look at the context of the HBO series, A Song of Ice and Fire, which he was executive producer and I believe was still involved for much of the beginning, you must see that in the context of George R. R. Martin, the writer. And some of the problems that you're seeing with the series finale is essentially reflected in the books, and you have to understand those two things. And I think the perspective I bring as a longtime book fan and book reader is something that's really been missing from what a lot of people are talking about in terms of the story beats of the series. Let us begin. So, George Martin, I think, had a lot of experience, okay, as a producer, as a scriptwriter in TV. And he always had a career as an author, but he was always more known for writing in the short story form than long form. So more short form than long form. And he has a undeniable history of not finishing very well. Short stories, of course, don't need epic conclusions. It's a 100-page novella. It's a short story. You usually set a hook, tell a brilliant story, you end it, you're done. It's set. And George is a brilliant writer. One of the best writers I've ever read in my life. He's amazing. You have to like his style, of course, but if if you like his style, I've also often said that I can read Martin writing a toilet, for like 50 pages and enjoy it. He's just that magical. And so a lot of people complain about his, excessive detail when it comes to feasts and food, but I love it because when I read it, it makes me feel like I'm there. It makes me feel like I'm about to eat the food, all of these things. So George is a fabulous writer, and that fabulous talent, that particular genius is especially well suited to short stories, stand-alone novels, novellas. Before A Song by Ice and Fire, I think his longest book, he didn't write many books. I mean, his longest book, really, one of the most successful, was Fever Dream, which is a blend of vampire, like modern vampire story, with sort of the steamboat, adventures of them going down the long Mississippi River and that type of thing. And it was a beautiful story. I love that, But that's him. He writes short stories. And if you look at his history, it's littered with various starts that never end. He always has these plans, and he's spoken very honestly about that. If you read his interviews way back before he became famous for HBO's version of Song Ice and Fire, he'll talk about how he has things in his mind that's percolating. Sometimes they sit there for a decade longer, and he's always thinking about new stories, and he has plans for this and this and that, but he never gets to them. He never quite finishes them, and that's who he is. Okay, so you have to understand that you're sort of A Song of Ice and Fire as a book series should make you very, very nervous if you look at the history of this guy. He's 70 years old. We have decades of who he is. So you should be nervous if you are getting into A Song of Ice and Fire as a book series, but with his track record, with his 4 to 5 decade history as a writer, which I have read almost all of his work. I can tell you that I was worried that he was not going to finish A Song of Ice and Fire. That's number one, strike one. Now, moving along, he then went to television and then became increasingly frustrated as a creative in the world of television, where they're calculating your script down to the last second because you have to have enough time for commercials and things like that. He felt extremely constrained trying to tell the story. He was also incredibly frustrated by pouring his heart and soul into writing these pilots. They would be used, maybe even shot. He'd get paid very good money, but nothing came of it. So he was stymied, I think, creatively. And after years and years of doing this type of work for Hollywood, especially with his experience with Beauty and the Beast, he was ready for a change, okay? And he wanted to just move away from, this is irony, actually, at its most delicious or its worst, depending on how your perspective is. Because remember, he went eventually back to HBO, but he wanted to move away from TV because he didn't want to be constrained anymore. He wanted a canvas, a big canvas. He wanted to write unfilmable scenes told against an unfilmable backdrop. He wanted budgets in the $1 billion range, right? And the only way you can do that is in a book with his imagination, which is basically completely, I think, unfettered. So after years of repression and creative stagnation, it all exploded with A Game of Thrones, where I think he envisioned the first scene, which was the one where they found the pups next to the direwolf, and it just kind of burst out of him. And I think a lot of that has to do, again, with that pent-up frustration for maybe a decade. And it came pouring out, and he just started writing these gigantic, huge stories. He wrote, I think you have to check, I think he wrote Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, and Storm of Swords within 4 years. It just rushed out of him. The vision was so clear. His inspiration was unquestionable. And so it comes out, it captures the imagination, some of the best books I've ever written. And then the story dies. Do you want to know the details? Of course I do. Because I'm going to share my pain with you. Okay. So how did that story die? I'll tell you how. Whatever he might have said about how he writes and how he's a gardener pruning the story as it goes, he wants to live. I can tell you right now that he had very little, I think, sense of truly what he wanted to do at the beginning. At the beginning, he put a very rough outline. It starts with, these kids fighting the direwolves. And he wanted, I think, the tone of the story to be this majestic, epic fantasy, with no budget, again, as a reaction to his previous experience on, with the TV. And it was going to be a more sort of realistic treatise on how medieval times are. His Starks and Lannisters were based on the Yorks and Lancasters, right, from the War of the Roses. And then putting little elements of magic like Tolkien, but with his own unique twist and his own like realistic bent and some subversion of tropes. And he had a very, very rough idea of what to do. And so that's kind of where it started. His way of depicting events was also very odd. He didn't follow a couple of main characters and tell it from, like, say, an omniscient point of view. He didn't go first person. He went with this really odd third person viewpoint. And so he tells the story from the viewpoint of different characters, and you have to kind of piece it together from their viewpoint. And so there's no real infinite omniscient perspective, which is very refreshing, but also can make the storytelling very, very complicated. If you want to move from one part of the world to another, you have to create a new viewpoint because you can't just go there, you see. And so I think that's what made the original Game of Thrones so shocking, was because a huge number of viewpoints was from Ned Stark. And so you get into Ned's head, and that's why you're shocked, of course, when Ned loses his head at the end of Game of Thrones. That's one limitation. The second limitation is, after the first 3 books, he got all of them up to one point in his story. And I think that's the point of the story where he had the greatest clarity. At that point, he ran into a problem, which clearly showed he really didn't know how everything was going to turn out when he started writing it. He just goes with it. He's an inspirational writer. When the inspiration hits him, it pours out of him. When it doesn't hit him, he's basically like dead, like a dead in the water, okay? He gets to the point at the end of the Storm of Swords where, Tyrion is on his way over across the sea, and, Dany's at a certain point, and Arya's going across the Bravos, and all of this, okay? And then he realized that his characters were too young. To get them to where he wanted them to be, he needed to age them up by about 5 years. And he ran into what he called the age gap problem. He needed Bran to be the three-eyed raven, Arya to become a faceless assassin, and Sansa maybe to get better at political manipulation, and blah, 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 blah. But he didn't have anything to do. He just wanted to jump them there, because the interesting parts of the story was after these characters got to where they were going. But the problem is, she started with main characters of a certain age, but he mixed them with characters that are basically adults, like, say, Jaime Lannister, for instance. And so he ran into this almost unsolvable problem where he was like, if I jump 5 years for the kids, then how do I explain what the adults have been doing during those 5 years? Like, are we seriously supposed to think that Cersei and Jaime would just be sitting around twiddling their thumbs for 5 stinking years? I mean, it just didn't seem like it was believable. And so he had to scrap that 5-year time jump. The result was a unmitigated disaster. Book 4 essentially never came out, okay? He worked on it for 5 years and then wound up publishing only half of a book called A Feast for Crows 5 years later. And in that book, A Feast for Crows, it contained none of the major viewpoints of the main characters. No Dany, no Jon, no Tyrion, like nothing. It basically was just this really long, slow, boring filler from characters that you didn't really care that much about. And the promise was that he would give the other half of the viewpoints, which he has supposedly written in the companion to Feast for Crows called A Dance with Dragons, a year or 2 years later at the most. That's the initial conceit. but it took him another 5 years to write A Dance with Dragons, which means it took him a decade before we were able to catch up to what was happening with the major viewpoints of the story. This was terrible. And it was at that point that I realized, as somebody who's read and enjoyed all of his work, that this series was dead, okay? And I took steps to rectify that because I had collected a lot of his books and stuff. I sold all of them off for a profit. And so at the end of A Storm of Swords back in 2001, 2002, you must understand, 17, 18 years ago, we who read the books already knew that this guy just did not know where he was going. He did not know what he was going to do. He talked about the Meereenese knot, the Meereen knot. And what's the knot? He did not know how to get Dany out of Meereen over to Westeros in a way that was believable, in a way that ran true. He couldn't get through all of that. So then he signed up with HBO. And at the time, all of us felt that one of two things was going to happen. And one of them did. We thought that the best case scenario was that signing up with HBO would motivate him more as a writer and that he would eventually finish the series because HBO was like a locomotive going on behind him right now. Once the season starts, it can't stop. Or we felt like what would happen was that essentially it would destroy the series because he would not be able to finish the book series, but contractually he would be obligated to give over whatever sparse notes he had on what he thought was going to happen. And the HBO was going to have to basically cobble together the rest of the story to finish this thing off. And I'll leave you to guess what happened. And you know what happened. So what are the ramifications of this? Now we go to season 8. We all know what happened. Dany goes crazy, massacres all the people in King's Landing. She has to be murdered by Jon. Jon then is then exiled, takes the Black. Bran becomes king. Arya goes west. All this ridiculous, nonsensical stuff. And all of that, I'm pretty sure, is what George Martin did plan 23 years ago. I got a news for you. He planned a lot of things. He made up a lot of things. A lot of those things were completely done away with. A lot of these things were completely unrecognizable by the time he wrote A Game of Thrones, A Clash of Kings, and A Storm of Swords. His initial outline was to write all of this story of A Song of Ice and Fire in only 3 books. And when he finished A Game of Thrones, Clash of Kings, and A Storm of Swords, he said he was only in around maybe book 1 territory to book 1.5 territory. So, you know, when you look at the end of this TV series, you have to ask yourself, well, was that really where the story was going to go? Or was that just basically what he had on the table and he just had to give it to Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners, because there was nothing else to do? And if the last season read to you like horrific fan fiction that just did not make an ounce of sense, then of course, yes, there is the burden and there is the blame for the showrunners because there's all this rumors like they wanted to do Star Wars and they were just sick and tired of it. Maybe they were burnt out, that HBO wanted them to have 10 seasons. No, HBO, of course, this is one of the most successful TV series in history. Why shouldn't it be? The first 3 books are like Mozart, okay? They're like genius works. So HBO was happy to beg George to go on forever, okay, or to beg Benioff and Weiss to go on forever. But they didn't want to, so they wanted less episodes. So there's a lot of blame for Benioff and Weiss, and I think rightly so, for being horrible writers, horrible script, horrible story, horrible character arcs, horrible character motivation, being in a hurry, turning down, more episodes, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, I do believe that all of these criticisms are warranted when you analyze and break down the last series, especially maybe even season 7, when they did not have as much of George's material to draw inspiration off of. I think Benioff and Weiss has done remarkable work. They added character arcs and beats to the story, like some of the conversations between Arya and Tywin, some of the little speeches by Littlefinger, that drew inspiration, I think, maybe from George Martin's works. They've done great work. But the reason for the disaster, and take it from me who has a perspective on this that very few other people have, following this for 20 years and really getting to know George's professionalism and what he's able to do and not able to do through his blogs and his authors' forwards and following the whole sordid, depressing history of the story, is that the lion's share of the blame is going to go to George Martin himself, because he could not finish the book. He never could. He is not the most professional of all writers either, for better or for worse, which means, like most geniuses, you can't force genius. As for those of you who don't understand that, you should read Walter Isaacson's biography of Leonardo da Vinci, who is one of the great geniuses of all time. And you will see that Leonardo da Vinci makes George Martin look like an on-the-clock, on-time accountant. Leonardo da Vinci was infamous for not finishing his stuff. A lot of pieces, works, he just could never get done. And even though everyone knew that this guy was a genius, sometimes, the prince would have to go, I just got to get somebody who's maybe a B-. I'm not as good as Leonardo, but at least I'm just going to get it done in 5 years. Maybe, with Leonardo, I may never get done at all. And so this is sort of the flip coin of genius, is this. So George couldn't get it done. And I'll be very honest with you, I don't think he has any idea what to do. And the problem here is that you can say 23 years ago, when you're plotting the story, that you want Bran to be king, or you want Dany to be the Mad Queen and die. But do you guys understand that there is a reason for 18 years he could not get there, okay? And even more, from the Dance with Dragons coming out in, I think, 2007, 2008, for essentially 9 years from the ending of A Dance with Dragons, that he was supposed to work on The Winds of Winter. 9 years he could not even write book 6. I will tell you the reason why. He could find no believable way to get Dany from where she was, where he wrote her, and the sort of person he wrote her, and the sort of girl and the sort of heroine that he wrote. He couldn't get her from there to the Mad Queen. He could not do it. He couldn't do it for Bran either. He could not find any way. This is not a month, a year, this is a decade. In 1 decade, despite all of his distractions and all of his unprofessionalism and his inability to work, he simply could not do it. He doesn't know how to tell you how Dany became this cray-cray Mad Queen at the end. He can't figure out a way, after writing Jaime the way he wrote him, to have him regress back to what he was at the ending of the series. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if George Martin himself, in a decade, could not figure out how to write these characters to the end, how then can you expect 2 hack Hollywood writers, one of whom was responsible for Wolverine Origin, to do the work that a world-class author could not? How do you expect Benioff and Weiss, and who were they before they made Game of Thrones? What talents did they have? What pedigree did they have? What work did they have to show you other than the horrific Wolverine origins? What evidence has been given to you that these 2 individuals could craft a road that one of the best authors, one of the best epic fantasy authors in history, one of the best writers, could not do for a decade? They couldn't. All they could do was get what George thought he was, basically all they could do was get from George the notes and say, well, George Martin says, what, this is kind of what I wanted to happen, and I can't figure out a way to get there. Just can't. It's been 15 years. I give up. Still working on it, but I just don't know what to do with it. It's going to sound stupid as hell. And now Benioff and Weiss has to do it for George. How the hell are they going to pull that off? They couldn't. They can't. And so in doing so, they made the greatest mistake. And maybe it was a mistake that was contractually obligated. And maybe that's why, turning it around, that's why they didn't want to make more Game of Thrones. Because that's not what they signed up for. There was nowhere to go, And you could give them 4 more years and 50 more episodes, but they would essentially be, you would essentially have to turn them into George Martin. They're not George Martin. They can't craft it. They couldn't figure out a way to make it. I mean, it's easy to sit here and say, oh, they just have to take their time so that the fall from grace of Danny is more believable. But the problem is there is no way to really realistically make that believable without making the audience feel like they'd just be taken for a ride, without making the audience feel like you just trolled them. You see that? It's kind of the Last Jedi problem all over again. And so what was their biggest mistake? Their biggest mistake was in taking George's crazy ending that he himself had no idea how to get to, and who maybe very well, if he ever does get to it, he may change completely because he would just realize, this is ridiculous. I thought that Bran was going to be king back in 1997, 98, 2001, 2002, but now that I've kind of crafted the story, I realize that is just horrific. I'm just going to have to change that, you know? And the same thing with Danny. Maybe he would shift her character a little bit. I wanted to write this arc, but that's not working. If it did, I'd be done with the series by now, you know? I can't figure that out, so I'm gonna have to change course. So George hasn't even done that for himself yet. And Benioff and Weiss essentially took his crackpot ending and then tried within essentially 2 seasons at best, probably even 1.5 at worst, within a few hours, they tried to twist it and squeeze that round peg into the square hole. And that was a disaster, because that essentially destroyed all the characters and nothing made really much sense. It's just like, what's the point of it all? It's completely pointless. And what they really should have done was realize, you know what, George? You don't know what the heck you're doing. It's painfully obvious you don't, because you've been working on this for 10 years. You can't even come out with the next book in a decade. You don't know how to get there. If you can't get there, we can't get there. And so we're just gonna have to make up our own ending in a way that makes sense. And maybe it's gonna be more Hollywood. Maybe it won't be as subversive. Maybe it won't be as genius, but at least it will make sense. Because quite frankly, we can't give your endings to these characters. We can't put them in our story in the time we have and have it make sense. And I think that's what they should have done, but maybe contractually they had to listen to George Martin, or maybe they didn't want to, or maybe they couldn't think of a better way themselves. Maybe they couldn't think of a better story themselves. And so you wind up with essentially the grease fire. That is season 8. So that's it from my perspective on it. I'm not going to be holding my breath for 70-year-old George R.R. Martin to all of a sudden come out with a satisfactory ending after he sold everything out to HBO in a satisfactory way. He's a great writer, but I think that at the end of the day, I don't think that if he keeps these ultimate character endings the same for the book series as for the HBO series, that it will end any more satisfyingly. I think the character arcs are hugely problematic. I think he's written himself in a corner, and I don't think he can believably create a path where you can take Danny, Jon, Jaime, Arya, Sansa, etc., to where he wants them to go in a way that's going to be believable. I just don't think he can do it. I think it's very likely that the series will never be finished, and I think if it does, and it is essentially finished, I would love to be proven wrong on that. But I think if he does finish it, I don't think it will be any more satisfying than the book, unless he changes significantly those story arcs to wind up in a different place, so that in the short amount of time he has, whether it's 3,000 manuscript pages and 2 books or 3 books, that in the time he has, he can make it reasonable. And understand that there is a craft to the story that is separate from the skill of it. You can write about a turd, and it'd be the best description ever, but that doesn't change the fact you're writing about a turd. If he creates a story of A Song of Ice and Fire that ends with Sansa becoming the Lady of Winterfell and the Northmen not questioning that ends with Arya just completely leaving her family to go off doing what knows what on the West, to become essentially Captain Jack Sparrow, it would just be so odd to end with a crippled Bran on the throne, and how that would go over with the other lords, and of course to end with Jon and Dany ultimately ending up where they are. It would feel like a huge cheat. It would feel essentially like he had trolled the entire book series fans. Like you were essentially manipulated into rooting for and cheering for Dany as a character, only to have him pull the rug out from your feet and stab you in the back by making her into this crazy, it just you basically crafted a story that, while subversive, also became completely pointless and meaningless, and it makes you feel like you've wasted your entire time with it. You can get away with that if you're writing a short story, which George is very good at. You can get away with that if, for instance, you're Agatha Christie and you write one 250-page book called The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and the entire book is from the point of view, spoilers, for those of you who have not read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. But the story is essentially from the point of view of the murderer. First person view. Do you understand the genius of writing a mystery novel from the point of view, first person of the murderer, without giving it away until the very end? That is the genius of Agatha Christie. You can get away with that if it's just one book over 250 pages. It's a nice little subversive twist. An I got you moment for a mystery novel that you devote maybe 4 or 5 hours to of your life. To do that over an epic fantasy, and basically you realize that this girl that you've been rooting for, who was only 13 or 14 at the beginning of Game of Thrones, who had all these things happen to her, who takes agency over her life, and it was all, this entire arc just goes and basically ends with her, essentially turning into her mad brother and her mad dad. It's essentially a sick joke, right? And then for John to essentially wind up going back to the Night's Watch. Essentially, those story arcs, well, it's George R. R. Martin's prerogative to write them any way he wants. It's our prerogative as readers and the ultimate judge of his work to say it's just basically a bunch of horse feces. That's how he decides to end things for them. And it basically makes the commitment to that story a complete, utter, huge, massive waste of time. The same thing again can be said with Jamie. And so I think the only hope is for him to maybe sit down there and really have hopefully a revelation that if you are not able to get to where you need to go, you might have to change things up and go with that, and try not to give us an ending that just feels like complete and utter nonsense. So I am disappointed that this is essentially how the series ended, because it is unfortunately a hint to how the books are going to end, and the probability is high that this is the only ending we'll ever get to A Song of Ice and Fire. The only hope I hold out for it again is that he will eventually get the last 2 books out, and that the ending of the character will be significantly different. Because if they're not, I just don't see how the book story will be any better than the series story. And the series story at this point is essentially shaped out to be a gigantic, massive waste of time, and probably one of the most disappointing, if not the most disappointing series ending of all time, which is a sad, bitter final turn for this story that I hoped would not happen, but I have to be honest with you, I kind of saw coming maybe even a decade ago that this was the way this was going to end up. So those are my thoughts on the Game of Thrones series ending, and from the perspective of the book fan, and again, my views and thoughts on why George essentially set up Benioff and Weiss to fail disastrously, and why their failure was inevitable because of what's been going on. And now you know why he hasn't written a book in 9 years, and why he wrote 3 books in 19 years when he wrote the first 3 in 4. He doesn't know how to end the story in a satisfying way. Sorry to end on that note. Until next time, do take care.